Good afternoon. Let's start the afternoon session about this workshop on humanitarian engineering. And as you heard before, the focus has been on favelas in Brazil. And the idea here is that on my side, I will present the context where the lab has been doing some work on favelas in Rio. And then Simone will take over to cover one particular experiment that we're doing right now there. So my name is Fabio Duarte, and I was in Rio last week working with this group, and mainly Simone will be presenting the fun part, because then we have a community actually engaged in doing some work. But I think it would be important for us to prepare and to give an overview of the context, right? And I will start with something that there is nothing to do about what we have been doing here, but I think this part shows a little how misconception plays a role when we talk about informal settlements. And a colleague of ours, now he is a director of the Inter-American Development Bank, but a few 2 years ago, more or less, he was playing with one of these Mid-Journey stuff, and this one is Mid-Journey. So he gave this prompt to Mid-Journey, right? So please prepare me an editorial style photo, eye level, wide angle, modernist social housing in Rio with families, children, Brazilians, high quality architecture, blah, 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 rendered 3D, photorealistic. And they present this thing here. And knowing Brazilian modernist architecture, Rio, etc., so, okay, well, it's a good image, it makes sense. This is how it looks like in Rio. And then he gave exactly the same prompt, but changed one thing only. And everything is the same. He only added one word here. And this is completely different. And why has he added here, near a favela? So this is not even a favela. Only by the fact that you assume that your modernistic Brazilian architecture, etc., moves from a random location to being close to a favela, this is what you have. So I think this is important just so we understand also when we're talking about informal settlements, and particularly in Brazil, all the misconceptions that come with that, right? And now what we have been doing in Brazil, we thought, okay, maybe we could try to use data for good, meaning how to combine technology, design, and community. And one part that we started doing also a few years ago, it was this project called Favelas 4D. And why we start doing this project Favelas 4D? Because this is an informal settlement in Rio. And usually when we think about, oh, the world is urbanizing in a fast pace, etc., oftentimes when you read that, you see images from Doha, Dubai, Singapore. But this is not true. The world's urbanizing very fast in this way, right? And so if we want to address urban problems, forget about Dubai. Focus on informal settlements. This is where urbanization is actually happening. However, one initial phase of any urban project is, okay, we need to have a map. We need to understand how this urban environment looks like, right? But how to map this informal settlement is very hard. One thing that obviously many municipalities and companies are doing is using satellite imagery, and then once they have the satellite imagery, they produce a map of that. However, if this is quite straightforward, if you look around here, it's true that, okay, if you have a satellite imagery, more or less, you don't have the small details of the buildings, but you have the footprint of the building. It's quite easy. But when it comes to an environment like that, things get super complicated, to a point that, for instance, you might not realize But between this green building and this other building here, this is a street. Actually, it's an alley, but it's a street, and somebody has a door facing that alley, and this is their only address. Also, we have many things in informal settlements that they don't have addresses. So if they don't have addresses, they will have many issues that we're going to see right now. So we said, okay, maybe we could try another technology. And one of the technologies that they have been using, including in Rio, is called LiDAR, which is kind of a laser scanner. In the case of Rio, they fly over that, and a LiDAR, for those who don't know, but basically it's a kind of a pointer, but it has so many laser beams. Then every time that the laser beams bounce back from the first obstacle that it encounters, it measures the distance, right? So it's very precise. However, again, even with this LiDAR, they have two issues. One issue is technical. Even flying over this favela here, they're still missing some very narrow alleys. They're missing some covered alleys, and even this type of shed here, since they are flying over, sometimes they take this as one floor, and it's not. It's what in Brazil they call the barbecue floor. It's something that nobody lives actually there. But they have another issue. When why would they fly over a favela? Not only why, but also when we start doing this work, okay, look, you should simply fly a drone instead of flying an airplane. Fly a drone over the favela and you have a pretty good picture with the LiDAR, right? And sometimes people say, okay, look, but you don't know Brazilian context, because if you're flying a drone over this favela, probably they will shoot it down, right? And I would really tell you that they are right. They should shut it down. Remember Nina's example of the bridge, right? The unjust technology, right? Okay, look, every technology is, you have a choice, right? So if we assume that we have the right to use our technology to fly over their community, they also might have a choice to use their technology, a machine gun, to destroy our technology, right? So it's fair. So we decided to do another approach. And our approach is very, okay, what if we walk through this favela with this laser scanner? And in order to do that, let's say that this laser scanner here, it took us 2 days to collect the data. But to ask permission and to have all the permissions from the community, it took us a few months. So this is the difference, right? The community engagement that both Alberto and Nina highlighted this morning, when we talked about humanitarian engineering, there is this social component that sometimes is much more important and more difficult to achieve than the technical part. Really, this is quite simple. Comparing with the social aspect, this is quite simple to do. And this is the video that we produced for this first project, right? And you're gonna see that Rocinha is not the biggest favela in Brazil, but it still has 100,000 inhabitants living there. And here you see some Google Street View images, but they cover only 23% of the favelas, and they'll say that this is quite an important number later. And we say, look, what if we go there with the LiDAR? So we went there, and everything that you see here, the color code is simply horizontal planes and vertical planes, that's it. But using that, we could do this very precise mapping, 3D mapping of this part of Rocinha, right? And after we did this work, I think it became quite interesting for the city of Rio. Then they decided to open a lab, so we now have the Sensible City Rio there. And now with this lab, we are mapping other favelas, including this one, which is another one called Vidigal. And in this case, we did this other mapping. It was at the Venice Biennale, and the idea behind that, so what we do with this data. One of the things that we are doing with this data is to provide addresses. And that's why also I mentioned why the fact that we're only covering 20% of the streets in Rocinha with Google Street View is important. Because actually, nobody has access to these environments, not even sometimes residents themselves. They cannot go from one part to the other, not because they don't find the way through it, but simply because they're controlled by different gangs sometimes. But the address is super important because in many parts of the world, if you apply for a job, if you don't have an address, you don't have a job. If you try to enroll your children in school, if you don't have an address, you don't have a place for your child there. So we thought, okay, maybe if we can do this 3D mapping and give an address, even a 3D address to these people, they could have some rights that otherwise they would not have. In some countries, including Mumbai, the city recognizes the Google address. So so if you go, maybe the three-word address, right? Google has something similar. So if you put any address, if you put your home address, go on 3-word address, then you put your home address, you're going to give a 3-word address: blue, sky, cloudy, whatever word. And then this is your permanent address. And Google has something similar, and the government of Mumbai recognizes this as an official address. So it opens doors that otherwise they would not have. But the difficulty is that this address is a 2D address, right? So if my address, I live in the 3rd floor, my address is exactly the same as my neighbor, right? This is not true. So what we're trying to do here is to create with this point cloud 3D addresses to everybody there. This is one thing. And then the other one that I will leave to Simone that I would like to explain is this work here. It's about using blockchain in favelas for land tenure. And why this is important? Because currently they built this home and they own this home, but it's not informal, but sometimes it's not legal. So they cannot be part of the real estate market. But some favelas in Brazil, they are using blockchain for opening companies, for doing transactions between, okay, look, I have this small business here, I know that I don't have address, but I need to buy some beer to sell here, so how do I do that? So they are already using some blockchain in their daily lives. So what we're proposing, also one of the things we're proposing, is to assign blockchains to part of this point cloud. Then they have the security of doing all the transactions as part of the official market through blockchain. And the other project that we're doing, then is the good time to hand over to Simone, is this one called Brisa Plus, is that some of these favelas, they are hotspots for cardiovascular and respiratory disease. And what we're doing with this 3D point cloud is first to map this 3D model and do all the wind simulation, airflow, etc., to see which are the points that we have lack of air circulation, whether they correlate with respiratory diseases, right? And which are the minimum interventions that I should make to guarantee a minimum airflow there. But also heat. You might have seen that, okay, obviously we had several deaths every year caused by heat stress, and this is not different in Rio, but also the amount of cardiovascular issues related to heat is increasing worldwide. And when it comes to favelas, they get warmer much faster and with much higher temperatures than everywhere else in the city. And this is what we're doing now with these communities. We're trying to collect, we are actually now, today, as I speak, collecting air quality and temperature data in these communities. But what's interesting, that's Simona, is that we're doing this with them directly.
Exactly. Thanks, Fabio. So many of the projects you just heard, and the project at the lab, deal with data, and one part of the process is to collect that data. Now, in many contexts, like in Boston, like in many kind of Western cities, that's not an issue because of either the data is already available or you have access to infrastructure that it's easy to deploy and to purchase. But when it comes to favelas, you cannot give for granted that either there is an existing infrastructure in place, because of most cases there is not, but also that the type of the adoption of the perception of certain technology from the community is kind of seen the way it's seen in other contexts outside the favelas. So in this project, we're looking how to make community part of the process of producing, combining, creating some sensing technology in a way that they decide how the technology can help their community. The project, the place where we're collecting data right now is a favela called Maré, which is what you see here on the left side of the screen. You can already see the stark contrast with another part of Rio. If I'm not wrong, this is the neighborhood of Gavea. And the striking contrast is Maré is a place where 70,000 people live in a 1 square kilometer. Gavea next door is a place where 17,000 people live over 2,000 kilometers. So basically double the amount of space for 1/5 of the population. And this is kind of a symbol of inequalities in the Brazilian context, but this is common to many other sides of the work. When we say about inequalities, many cases is income inequalities, but it could also be environmental inequalities, meaning, as Fabio brought to your attention, air quality, heat, in general, how residents are exposed to environmental factors that are detrimental to their health. Another thing about favelas, at least some of a favela, is this part of how tight communities are, how engaged they are into making the place where they live healthier, better. And this is the case of Maré. Maré is a favela where there's several organizations that do citizen engagement and that advocate for better living conditions. One of these is called Redes de Maré, which is networks of Maré. And they've been doing a number of data collection studies over the years, for example, looking at air quality. I'm telling you this because of when you want to collect data in a place like a favela, it has to involve the community at some point for different reasons, to avoid being perceived as kind of data colonists or colonizers, meaning that you go there, you do some sort of intervention for your own good, and you don't bring back anything to the community, but also in terms of acceptance. You cannot bring in the favela anyone or any technology unless it's accepted by the community. And the framework where we try, and the tools that we try to use to understand this tension between collecting data, making community part of the data collection, but also collecting data that is robust from a scientific point of view, that actually can be used for research and advocacy, is something we call the Octopus, which is a platform we've developed for exactly this purpose, to make it accessible to communities to build environmental sensors. And this is something different from kind of the low-cost and open-source sensing fields. You might have heard, you might be familiar with products like Purple Air, this type of so-called low-cost sensors that are low-cost for kind of EPA standards. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, consider low-cost any sensor below $2,500, but it can be super high cost. These sensors usually cost you $300. Still, they are not accessible to community, but also they're black box. The fact that you buy, you deploy, you don't know if there is a camera, if there is a microphone. We, as kind of engineers, scientists, we know that if we're able to read the product description to realize what kind of data it collects. But for many others, if there's not an educational component, if these devices are not proposed to the community in a certain way, it might not be clear at all that they're collecting air quality data and they're not taking photographs of whatever. And Octopus basically, it builds on this requirement of making technology that is open, it's completely open. It has an educational component, which is not just, it goes beyond making technology open, but it's also producing documentation and educational activity to help non-experts to understand the technology. And finally, it's very easy to deploy. We've designed something that can be attached to trees, light poles, can be put as a fixed element of the environment, as well as it can be deployed on bikes or even as a wearable device. So in September, 4 months ago, we tried for the first time to implement this framework in Rio. So we recruited about 40 participants from Favela de Maré. We invited them to a makerspace where we gave lectures about fabrication, about technology. We explained how the different components that make the Octopus are for and what type of data they collect and so on. And then together we built about 12 devices we see here. It was a team activity, it was a fun activity. And then the second day, there was a 3-day workshop. The first day focused on the device. We built the device together, we tested it. And the goal again, it was not just to have them as labor, but was actually to make them understand the process in a way that can also communicate to other community members what the sensors are for and what can be useful. The second day is about how you plan the deployment of this sensor. Obviously, we, as MIT researcher, at least I have no clue about where to deploy sensor. You need some local knowledge, and this is also showcase how important it is to have people involved, people from the communities involved. So together we designed the data collection routes. So we had what we call walkers with the device, walking around the same route every day, twice a day. And this route basically is designed to collect data in near locations that are populated, but also in places that are far away where static sensor can be deployed. You cannot put static sensors everywhere for both a cost reason, but also in some places it's just there is no electricity, there is no network, there is just not feasible. And together with some technology that include like old school physical maps and real future reality environment, we help the community to find these locations. And then finally, on the third day, we deployed the sensor and we basically taught the community how to maintain, how to download the data. Again, something that we have discovered by doing this is sometimes you want to involve, you want to make the community as part of this process, but it's very hard because of many different reasons, because of language barrier, because of technology barrier, because as much as you try to kind of develop technology that is friendly and so on, some tasks, they have a learning curve. They can be repetitive. It's boring to kind of, go there and check every day if the device is working, to remove a data card and download the data. especially if you don't have some quick feedback loop. When you do research, it's not like with a 1 day or 2 day or 1 week of data collection, then you can find something meaningful, something that gives the community a proof that the work they've done is actually has an impact. The feedback loop here are not very long, but they're long as in any other project. So I think one of the challenges we're faced, and maybe something else, one of the challenges that I would give you as a task for this afternoon is actually how you engage, how you motivate communities to take part into these research processes, and how maybe you build these feedback loops with them that are important to keep them engaged, but eventually to have an impact on the community. I think this is all. If you have any questions, either from me or from Fabio, I think now is a good time to ask. Yes, Fadi.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised how quickly you were able to get the buy-in of the favela, and like you said, 4 months, Fabio, like just to do the library work. Is it like you had an NGO or some kind of community organization that helped you get there? Because otherwise it would have been a much more difficult process to get the buy-in. And like, what is considered buy-in? Like, who in the community gets to decide? Is it like a democratic process? Is it like majority? Or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a very. I don't know if I have the full answer, because we speak only with each favela. They have different community organizations. I turn it off. Now I turn it on. Okay, cool thing. So, as I was saying, so how to approach and how to get the buy-in from the community, right? So these favelas, they are pretty big, and there is a single organization responsible for the entire community. Luckily, so 2 examples. In the case of Rocinha, we only scanned part of the favela because we were talking directly with the community of this part of Rocinha. So we could only walk in this area and not say, I'm mapping the entire favela. No, we are not. In the case of Maré, although it's bigger, it's 140,000 inhabitants, then they have what Simone was mentioning, the redes, this network. So this network, we don't know how they were capable of doing that, but they have been running in this community for almost 20 years, or a little bit more than 20 years, and they have what they call, it's not centers, but they have kind of some nodes in different parts of this community. And when you talk with them, they said, okay, we are getting back to you in 1 week, and they have their network, and okay, yes, you can, yes, you cannot. So they have their own organization. And obviously, what we know also is all of them, they don't say it explicitly, but all of them, they have internal connections that we, as a research lab, we're never talking directly with residents or anything. It always needs to go through these community centers or leaders. Yeah.
And you must have had like an initial in to know that this organization exists, and like you had the contact?
Yeah, so for the Rocinha case, it was, the processes were different. In the case of Rocinha, the municipality were doing, I don't remember if it was a sewage or water supply work in Rocinha. So they had access to the community, and we basically piggybacked on what the city was doing. So the city, you are going there to do a mapping, etc. Can we go with you? Then the municipality talked to the community, okay, look, we're coming here, and these other people are coming with us. Fine. In the case of Maré, they are pretty famous in this area in Brazil. So probably everybody who works with informal settlements in Brazil knows these redes da Maré. So we knew them. We knew that they existed beforehand. So then we contact somebody. Okay, look, Can we visit there, etc.? Yeah.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
Question about the placement of the octopus.
Ah.
Some are in fixed locations, some are portable. Is there a different design for either, or is one like tracking over time, or like?
Do you want to take it?
Yes. Actually, forgot to mention that we also have some devices indoor. So it's both fixed indoor, outdoor, and mobile. Obviously, when you have a fixed device, it works 24/7. You have a much higher time resolution, but low space resolution. When you're mobile, it's reversed. So you have a more space resolution, but you have less data point in each position per time. And I think both are there, again, both are pro and cons. And we have designed the pilot in a way to combine both type of devices. I think the both type of strategies. I think the advantage of the mobile one is that you can choose different routes. If you see something interesting in terms of trends, in terms of patterns in certain area, then you could rearrange the data collection around that area. Something that you need a bit more work to do it with static sensors. I think it's also a trade-off between covering as much space as possible, but also making the technology non-intrusive. So we're actually asking the workers to walk around with octopus, but also as part of their routine activities. So it's kind of a mix of what we call opportunistic sensing, which is without sort of collecting data during everyday routine operation, and striving to have the best coverage and the best map as possible.
And one thing to comment, for instance, I think if you think of this image, right, combined with this, so the person walk. So we have 4 residents walking the same route every day, twice a day, and every time the walker. This is a researcher, by the way. She's from Twente. She was there in the she's still there, but she was helping also in the first workshop, etc. But the carrier, the what they call, they have a specific articulator or whatever, but the field researcher, they walk twice a day in front of this fixed device. So then it helps a lot us to know, okay, look, whichever data it's getting with this device, it needs to match or be very close to the data collected with this device. If it's not, something is wrong with one of them.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know if Simone is sure, but they have selected where to place. You show the map, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So they have selected the fixed locations, but also the routes that they thought we should take.
And I think
Go ahead.
Just to add, is also important this layer of qualitative data. So the local knowledge is good both to choose where to place the sensor. So my perception is that air quality or heat in that area is bad. And then we kind of use data to prove if that's correct. But also in sport is important when you have the data to try to make sense of the data, to kind of have this process where you sit together, we look at trends, and you combine this qualitative knowledge about the favelas with the actual data. It's more, so kind of more, it goes both ways. You use the qualitative knowledge to inform where to put the sensor, and then you use the data from the sensor to kind of help the sense making through qualitative knowledge.
Go ahead.
Is the octopus designed to be able to collect a wide range of different types of data, or is it, in this case, only focused on what you guys mentioned about like temperature data?
Yeah. So by design, it's very, very modular, and it could kind of be configured with sensor that goes from very simple temperature humidity to cameras that do visual AI on the edge, for example, for biodiversity monitoring, which is, by the way, another area of research the lab is doing. Here we are collecting air quality. We kind of excluded all use cases where you need a camera because of for acceptance, technology acceptance reason. And we're collecting basically air quality, which is particulate matter and temperature, humidity. But you can. The idea is that you can adapt it to different scenarios.
But just be mindful of the time. So if you have a final question, otherwise we move